History is filled with the good, the bad, and the ugly, and thankfully I'm part of the good and the pretty, so I have nothing to worry about. I'm just kidding, you guys, before you come for me. I feel like history is very one-sided. It's written by the heroes, and therefore we don't always get the full picture. Colonizing North America was a victory for white settlers, and therefore we learn all about it in school, but why isn't as much emphasis put on the massacre of the Native Americans that were already there? What is up, you guys? Hope you're having an awesome day. I'm your host, Ammons Hassan, and welcome back to another video. History is full of horror, so I think it's only fitting we talk about it. These are the top 10 real-life historical horror stories. Starting us off at number 10 is the torture cabin. This one is terrible, and I'm also surprised at how many torture dungeons have existed throughout history. Like, it's a bit too much for my liking. Now, back in 1979, Leonard Lake was medically discharged from the Marine Corps after doing 2 tours in Vietnam. The reason was a mental breakdown and him being diagnosed with impending schizophrenia. But Leonard had been disturbed since childhood. He used to take nude photos of his cousins and sisters and would kill animals. Either way, when he got back to the US, he was convinced a nuclear holocaust was on its way, so he took refuge in his wife's cabin. There, he invited his little brother and his friend, both of whom he murdered later on. He then found accomplice Charles Ang, and together they went on a full-on killing spree. Between 1983 and 85, they kidnapped, raped, tortured, and then killed 11 to 25 people. They would keep the female victims as sex slaves and lock them in a tiny bunker with nothing but a bucket and toilet paper. After raping them, they'd murder them and chop up the body parts and then dissolve them in acid. They were captured due to a theft blunder in 1985, but Leonard had prepared for the situation by sewing cyanide pills into his clothing. He ate some while in custody and died before ever being imprisoned. Charles, on the other hand, was found guilty of 11 counts of murder and sentenced to death, but remains on death row till this day. Like, I just don't understand what goes to your mind to want to do these things. Like, what has motivated you to do that? Coming in at number 9 is the purple dolphin. Back in February of 2005, sex offender John Cooey broke into the Lunsford family home in Homosassa, Florida, and kidnapped their 9-year-old daughter Jessica. From there, he took her to his trailer before raping her for 3 consecutive days, and if that wasn't horrific enough, he then promised her he would take her home. He convinced her to get into a garbage bag to stay hidden so she wouldn't get in trouble for being away from home for that long, and then he put another bag over her head before burying her alive. The only thing she had to keep her calm was this purple dolphin that her dad had won for her at a fair. She was buried alive, and the worst part was that she was probably still alive when officers conducted their first and possibly second interview with John. They found her blood on his mattress, and when she was finally found, she was still clutching the dolphin, and the bags had tiny finger holes in them from her attempt at trying to escape. John was rightfully convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other charges. Oh, I knew this wasn't going to be a fun video to make. I knew it. At number 8, you have the beast of Gévaudan. Back in the 18th century, the French countryside was being terrorized by a grisly wolf-like beast that mauled nearly 300 villages. The first victim was discovered in 1764. 14-year-old Jeanne Boulet was found with her throat ripped out and managed to tell villagers about the beast before succumbing to her death. Within a few weeks, 100 more people were attacked, and all the bodies showed signs of a creature with sharp teeth and claws having ripped them apart. Infantry leader Jean-Baptiste Duhamel organized a 30,000 volunteer hunting party to find the beast, but to no avail. Sick of the incompetence, King Louis XV sent his own bodyguard Francois Antoine to do the job, and by 1765 he had managed to kill a very large wolf. The attack stopped for a few months after that before starting up again, and this time the description of the beast was that much more horrific. Now it was some sort of werewolf that was impossible to kill. A farmer called Jean Chastel then took it upon himself to go to the mountains with a gun and Bible in hand and hope the beast would show itself, and apparently it did, and then it was slain for good. Filling at number 7 slot is the Jonestown Massacre Part 1. I know you guys have heard this one before, but regardless, I had to put it on the list. If you know the story already, feel free to skip to number 5, but if not, stay tuned for a wildly sinister story. The People's Temple Agricultural Project, better known as Jonestown, was a massive city which was actually just a cult run by Jim Jones located in Guyana. The base of the cult was originally in Indianapolis, but after receiving heavy criticism terrorism, he moved his cult from location to location until finally leasing 3,800 acres of land in Georgetown. In the summer of 1977, Jones and hundreds of followers moved to Jonestown, and by 1978, the population of the city had peaked at under 900 people. Life in the commune was bad, but for the followers, they were reaching some sort of enlightenment. Jones's mental and physical health started declining rapidly. He developed lung cancer and was actively abusing drugs like Valium, LSD, and barbiturates, to name a few. Many reporters and Congressman Leo Ryan came to Jonestown to investigate and was soon assassinated. 5 deaths occurred, and despite later reporters saying they would say Jonestown was in good standing, the damage was already done. And it just gets worse and worse. Cults are just never a good idea, are they? Yet they're still a thing. Now, at number 6 is the Jonestown Massacre Part 2. Jim claimed he had failed and that all was lost. That night, a broadcast was made for every follower to return to their house, and during that time, aides made huge metal tubs with grape-flavored Kool-Aid that was poisoned with cyanide, Valium, chlorohydrate, and Phenergan. Jim called everyone to the pavilion. He gave the death speech to his followers that was recorded and can be heard online, and soon after, the members started drinking the poisoned Kool-Aid. The first death was Roulette Paul and her 1-year-old kid. They had to inject the poison into the kid's mouth to get the deed done. Death happened pretty quickly, 5 minutes for kids, even less for babies, and around half an hour for adults. That day, 918 people died in a mass suicide, which was the largest single loss of American civilian life until 9/11 happened. Coming in at number 5 is the murder-suicide. Back in September of 2014, a Utah teen came home and couldn't locate his parents or 3 siblings anywhere. The door to the master bedroom was jammed, and so he called his grandma, who forced the door open. To their horror, the bodies of all 5 family members were spread out across the room. What happened to Benjamin and Christy Strack and their 3 kids? When the police got there, they found a bunch of empty containers for all kinds of medications, as well as a sand pail filled with a yellow mixture of a bunch of drugs. Autopsy results showed that the whole family had high levels of antihistamines and methadone in their bodies. The dad even had toxic levels of heroin in his system as well. It was determined that the parents killed themselves and the 2 youngest children, who weren't even old enough to consent to dying. The 3rd child was 14 years old, meaning it was hard to figure out whether he was old enough to consent to that decision, but he had left a letter behind for a friend a few days prior saying he would no longer be on this earth. Apparently, the parents were extremely paranoid about a pending apocalypse and were very good friends with convicted killer Dan Lafferty, often visiting him in prison. I don't know what possessed them to kill themselves and their kids. Probably they didn't want to die in the apocalypse, so we're like, let's just kill ourselves instead. But I mean, I feel bad for the 1 kid that was left behind. At number 4 is the possessed Ammons family. Not to be confused with the Addams family, but I can see how you'd get that. Now, back in 2011, Latoya Ammons moved into a new house with her mother, Rosa Campbell, and her 3 children. A few days after they moved in, a crazy amount of flies started swarming their porch and would not leave or die. Now, the events that took place after this have led people to believe that her children, aged 12, 9, and 7, were up late one night playing around online and may have summoned a demon, not believing anything would happen. You know, as you do, casually summon a demon during your late night antics. Either way, Campbell started hearing doors creaking and opening and footsteps in their basement when no one was down there. She even saw a man pacing in her living room and found a literal boot print. If that's not hard evidence, I don't know what is. Her daughter's friend then claimed her daughter was levitating above the bed at a sleepover, yet she had no recollection of the incident ever taking place. Her middle son was thrown across the room, and her youngest son's eyes rolled to the back of his head as he started saying the words, "I will kill you and it's time to die." A few months later, the Department of Child Services visited the house and they saw her youngest son walk up the wall backwards. That's some exorcist right there. And that's personnel saying that, not even the family themselves. That's how you know it's real, people. People claim it was a demon Beelzebub that was summoned, who's otherwise known as the Lord of the Flies. They hired a priest to perform not 1, not 2, but 3 exorcisms, and after that, the family was demon-free. And probably with a lot of trauma and therapy needed. Filling at number 3 slot is Abu Ghraib. If we're going to talk about the illegal war waged on Iraq by the Bush administration, we have to talk about what happened to the prisoners inside the Abu Ghraib prison. The prison was initially used by Saddam Hussein to hold over 50,000 people, but after the collapse of his government, the US Army took it over and turned it into their military prison. It was meant to hold around 7,500 people, and the atrocities that took place inside it are unspeakable. Manadel al-Jamadi, a prisoner suspected of a bomb attack died after being interrogated and tortured. The picture of him that circulated everywhere had his face, chest, and stomach covered in his own feces. Another picture was his frozen dead body hung up with US Army specialists posing with their thumbs up in front of it. Prisoners were also routinely sodomized by broomsticks and chemical lights and forced to perform sexual acts on each other with bags over their heads. US staff also routinely raped most of the female prisoners. They would pee on prisoners, beat them while they were handcuffed, pour acid on them and their genitals, and even have venomous snakes bite them, often resulting in their deaths. After the pictures and evidence became public, Bush had to admit what was going on, but obviously claimed they were all isolated incidents. Bush, you're talking mad shit. Now, number 2 is the dollmaker. This one actually made my skin crawl, like it is disgusting. Anatoly Moskvin was a Russian philologist who did unspeakable things. It all started when he was young. He would often visit cemeteries and blamed his obsession with the dead on the fact he saw a funeral procession for an 11-year-old girl when he was a lot younger. Apparently, funeral goers forced him to kiss the corpse on the face who he didn't even know that well. I can understand why that would traumatize a person. As he grew older, he got more and more interested in death, the occult. He even had a library consisting of 60,000 books and a huge collection of dolls. Despite being described as a genius eccentric by fellow academics, Anatoly was arrested in November of 2011 after police started investigating a slew of grave desecrations in several cemeteries. When they stormed his house, they found 26 corpses, but he'd actually desecrated a record 150 graves. He made the child corpses into actual dolls. He would mummify each one to preserve their bodies. He would then wrap their limbs in strips of cloth to make them seem more full before dressing them up in wigs and brightly colored children's clothing. All these details convinced his parents, who he was living with, that they were homemade dolls and not real people. I don't know how much faith and trust you have to have in your son to even believe that for a split second. He claimed it took him 10 years to assemble all the dolls, and since his parents traveled often, they had no idea what he was up to. He was declared to have paranoid schizophrenia, which saved him jail time but put him in an asylum. When asked why he did all of this, he said he had a lot of sympathy for dead children and felt that they should be brought back to life. He put their remains in dolls' clothes so they could have functional bodies when they did come back to life. He knew he was committing a crime but felt the children were calling out to him, begging him to be rescued. And finally, at number 1 is the Brooklyn Vampire. Born on May 19th, 1870, Albert Fish was put into a New York orphanage soon after he was born. There, he was frequently beaten by the staff, and that's where it became enshrined in him that pain meant pleasure, and that included sexually as well. When his mum finally got her life together 10 years later, she took Albert out of the orphanage, and that's where took a turn for the worst, if that already wasn't bad enough. He started beating himself up, consuming his own waste, and pleasuring himself by shoving needles into his stomach and groin area. At 20 years old, he started working as a gigolo and would lure kids from their homes to his own house in order to torture, rape, and then kill them. The trifecta of serial killers everywhere, apparently. He would even beat them using a paddle covered in nails and then eat them afterwards. Weirdly enough, someone was unfortunate enough to marry him and give him 6 kids. After she ran off with someone else, he made his own kids paddle him, which I don't even want to think about. He started targeting African American children since they were less looked for by authorities, and I feel like that's still true very much till this day. In 1928, he hired Edward Budd to help him around the house, but told him before he got hired he had to come to his kid's birthday party and bring his 10-year-old sister Grace. She was never seen again, and that's when really hit the fan. 6 years later, Mrs. Budd got a letter explaining in too much detail the murder, dismemberment, and eating of her own daughter. The letter was traced back to Albert, and he was electrocuted to death 2 years later. Oh, I feel like let's just all take a deep breath after that horrific video. Breathe it in, exhale the negativity. And that is it for today's video, guys. I hope I didn't horrify you to no extent, but also at the same time, I feel like 2020 was a horrific year in and of itself. So I mean, did I really do that much? Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. And also, happy Pride Month. Woohoo, gotta end on a high note. Let me know what you guys are doing for Pride Month, if anything at all. As always, I'm your host, Eamon Hassan, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye. King Louis the... what the is that? 15th? Let's do it again. Woohoo. After receiving heavy criticism, you know? Did you get that fact? Yeah? Cool. Hee 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 hee. Tee hee hee. And for nagging. And for nagging. I don't know. But let's look.